I want to hear the Ben Parker story.
Okay, yeah, I can get into that. Okay, I'll give like the moderate version. Like, there's a couple versions of this story, I'd say. So I'll kind of to tell the Ben Parker story. I'll kind of start back in 2012 is when I took over the Nichols Lures operation. Um, it was a very small company at the time. The Nichols that ran it were really successful in the 90s due to some personal health reasons. Like in the 2000s, they kind of like, they were not as focused on the company. They were focused on some personal health matters for very good reason. Um, but in 2012, we found Nichols online for sale on bizbuysell.com, which is kind of like the eBay for businesses. And it was like, Dave and his wife, small enough that probably me by myself could manage it. Um, had a real passion for fishing, so moved to Texas for a few months, learned how to run the business, and moved it back to my hometown here in Thomasville. At the time, one of the things that we loved is they had a really solid existing product line. Their marketing probably needed some work, their web presence needed some work, and all those things, and just they needed some fresh energy. But they had really solid, product lines. One of which was a 4 and 5 inch flutter spoon, the Lake Fork flutter spoon. Now, the only gripe I have with Dave is that and I don't know if it's with Dave or somebody else, but Nichols has the Lake Fork flutter spoon, but there's also a Lake Fork trophy tackle flutter spoon. That gets a little confusing. Little bit of a bummer that two competing products share such a close name, but whatever. Sold 4 and 5 inch spoons at the time. Lots of people did, I'd say. Strike King had the sexy spoon. We were just one of several. And it all originated around that Fork area. Joe Spate spoons out there. Like, there's a lot of guys that have been doing it for a long time. Nichols was certainly, I would say, not the first in big flutter spoons, but they were in Jacksonville, Texas. Like, they were near Lake Fork. They were among some of the first people making these 4 and 5 inch flutter spoons. So that was one of our bigger product lines when I started with the company in 2012. I pretty quickly learned, and at the time that 5 inch model was like the biggest one. Like, that was the big flutter spoon. There was always a rumor that Joe Spates had one bigger, and they may have at the time, but not much bigger. That 5 inch model was about the biggest one you were going to find. Well, I also learned, the first couple of years, like we talked about, like, stuff that's in Bassmaster magazine is not there by accident. When a pro mentions a product in an article, there's usually a pretty direct tie between them being paid to do so by that brand. Well, I had no money to pay anybody. Like, I had no pro staff. We started some social media stuff because it was just me. But we didn't have a budget for that. Probably in 2013, Bassmaster ran a quick article at the back. It was like their 5-minute angler tip. They still have this segment in the magazine. It's near the back, and it's like a very quick 1 or 2 page segment on a new technique where they interview one of their pros. At the time, Ben Parker, it was in a summer article, had been interviewed about spoon fishing. Ben was a guy that had been an Elite Series pro. I think did okay with it, but maybe realized that there was better money in guiding on the Tennessee River. And so I don't think at that time he was still an Elite Series pro, but they interviewed him for the article. He mentioned he used a Nichols Lures 4 and 5 inch flutter spoon. I never heard of the guy, much less met him, or certainly never paid him. Like, he mentioned our product in Bassmaster magazine. For me, as a new owner of a product, of a tackle company, it was huge. And so I literally called his guide service phone number to just say thank you, because I could not believe somebody would mention our products for nothing. Spoon sales were actually pretty good for us that summer. And I have to believe part of it was because of that article. So I get on the phone with him, and we just kind of hit it off, I'd say. In that first conversation, I'll never forget, of course I sent him some free baits. And he was like, man, I'll tell you what, though, Ben had he was one of the early guys in on electronics guiding at the time. He was very good. So like you got to learn from Scott Canterbury. First time I met Ben Parker, we were on Kentucky Lake. I'd never seen side imaging, and he was like educating me. That's really what he started doing for a living after his Elite Series career. He was guiding on Kentucky Lake, anywhere on the Tennessee River, teaching people. He was getting in their boat, teaching them how to use their electronics. So we hit it off, and he's like, man, like, we catch fish on the 4-inch and 5-inch model, 5-inch especially, but I'll be honest, like, this was in Kentucky Lakes in its heyday. It's like, dude, there's mega schools up here. That was before mega school was like even a buzzword. Mm-hmm. And he's like, man, I just am telling you, Brooks, like, I see these fish chasing shad so much bigger than 5 inches. And I'm telling you, we need a bigger flutter spoon. If you will make a bigger flutter spoon, I promise you it's going to work. And so I literally remember I was like, I don't know, man, like, how big are you talking? Like, what do you mean? It's like, I don't know, like 8 inches. I think, you got 5, but I know these gizzard shad are more like 8 inches long. I'm like, all right, like, whatever. Like, in my head, I'm kind of like, all right, that's 5, that's 8. Like, I don't know, that doesn't seem too crazy. So I ordered a prototype, and because honestly, Ben had done me such a big favor. Like, I was just willing to run through a wall for the guy. Like, he did me a solid. He really asked for nothing in return. So when he asked if I could make a bigger spoon, I was pretty receptive to it. And so I just said, sure, man, like, let's see what happens. We had a prototype made. The way that they make those prototypes is pretty interesting. They're stamped out of brass. And so to make a prototype, I remember I called my manufacturer of the 5-inch spoons, and I was like, hey, man, like, can we literally take that 5-inch spoon and make it 8 inches and just increase all the proportions the same way? And they were like, okay, yeah, we can do that. And I get the first prototype, and I just didn't realize, like, how much larger proportionally an 8-inch spoon would be. And I mean, I remember I got this thing, it was hand cut out of brass and hand contoured with a rubber mallet. It's like, dude, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, maybe it will catch fish, I don't know, but this thing is stupid. So I probably let it sit on a prototype shelf for a couple months, but Ben kind of kept pestering me. And to just have that first prototype made did not cost a whole lot of money. Well, then, he kept on bothering me. I sent him one of the prototypes that I had in brass. Sure enough, dude started catching fish on it. And so I go up to visit him in Kentucky Lake. Again, we just kind of keep hitting it off, and things are going really well with our two brains working together. So I finally decide, like, all right, man, like, you're telling me you're catching fish like crazy on this thing. I'd had a couple more prototypes made at that time where he maybe had like 3 of them. And he's just sending me pictures where he's just cracking them on Kentucky Lake with it. So I finally had a die made. And that, to me, to make that die was like all the money that I had in the world. At the time, I bet it was $7,000. But for me, that felt like this is all. Like, I'm pushing all my chips in here. And I remember I ordered 500 of them to start with. Because, again, like, I thought it was stupid. I didn't have packaging to put it in. I didn't have a hook to put on it. Because I didn't think that far. This was like one of the first product launches I'd ever done. But I just knew this guy wants them, so I guess I'll get them. So I got in 500 nickel-plated 8-inch spoons. Ben paid me for half of my cost on it, and I gave half of them to him. Well, it just so happened, like, literally the week that he got them in the mail, he got 250 of these spoon blanks, was the FLW event on Kentucky Lake. Well, before I know it, like, I still just didn't know enough about the industry. Like, I didn't have relationships with anglers. Ben did. So before I know it, you see the first day report, and like Randy Haynes is throwing it, and Jason Lambert's throwing it, and Clint Davis is throwing it, and holy crap, like, everybody's throwing it, and they're on video catching fish on it. Like, I remember thinking, like, Ben told me I'm going to go give this spoon away to some of my buddies. And I remember thinking, like, dude, it'd be really cool if we got, like, one picture with somebody catching a fish on a spoon. And then
now you're like, I better get my shit together quick.
Dude, it was awful. Like, so, like, by the end of the tournament, like, they're breaking this story. And I'll never forget, like, the front page article on FLW is like, the Magnum spoon has landed on Kentucky Lake. And I'm like, oh, my God. And like, but again, at the time I'd given away half of what I had and I only had 500. And so I had 250 spoon blanks with no hooks to put on them and no package to put them in. I remember I had actually priced these to Tackle Warehouse before we shipped them to Ben. And I remember I put the price at like $19.99 for retail because, I mean, they were expensive to make. And I remember Brian, my buyer at Tackle Warehouse, was like, yeah, I mean, we'll order like 6s of them. Like, I don't know, like, because I had sent him a picture of it. And so they literally ordered 6 of these things, Tackle Warehouse did. Well, by the end of this tournament, like, I remember I had, so by the end of the Sunday, like half of the top 10 is using the spoon. It's all over the internet. People are blowing us up. I had my mother, my father, I'm in there answering the phones. We had 2 phones that we were answering. I had one friend that literally was just set up answering emails. We put them on the website like dummies and started taking pre-orders, even though I didn't have but 250 of them. But I remember thinking like, oh, like maybe we'll sell all 250 of them. and I'll just never forget, like, I remember that Monday, I called my supplier and I was like, that Monday morning, I was like, hey guys, like, we sold those 250. Like, I think I need like 500. And they're like, oh, whoa, like, oh, I don't know if we can do that. What do you mean? Because for them, it was a new product. Like, they had to figure out some new processes to stamp and plate such a large item. They're used to little fishing lures. So I had like all this stuff happening. And by the end of that Monday, I had called them and I'd been like, hey, we got to order 10,000 of these. Like, I mean, it had just quickly escalated. And it was both great and terrible. I mean, the great thing was, like, all of a sudden people wanted our stuff. The bad thing was I didn't have any. And people did not understand that I did not have any. And so we had, like, I mean, dude, we were getting accused of all kind of stuff. Like, I'll never forget the first show I went to and I had some for sale there. And people were like, that's not the one that they had out there on Kentucky Lake. I was like, what do you mean? Like, no, they had some other one. It's like, dude, I'm telling you.
Who else is making it?
Yeah, this is the one I'd be like, we're the only ones on the planet with these. No, they had some other model out there. Okay, dude, whatever. But it took us so all that to say, like, probably within the first 6 months, I think we ended up selling like 30,000 of them. And I mean, like I said, it was good, but it was at times like really stressful. Like, I remember the problem with an item like that is like finding the package was more difficult than I thought. Like, just finding a thing to put it in to sell it was hard. The hook was really challenging. Like, turns out most hook manufacturers don't just keep 3/0 treble hooks on their shelf all the time. And when they do, they keep maybe like 500 of them around because nobody uses 3/0 treble hooks. Well, all of a sudden I'm like, hey dude, I was calling every day. I need you to change the order from 10 to 15. I need you to change the order from 15 to 18. And they're like, dude, I don't know when we're going to get these. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, dude, we don't have this many 3/0 treble hooks. So literally the way that the flow would work would be like, for that first 6 months, I hired our first employee who only literally stopped working for us about 3 weeks ago because she's having her third child. So she had been with me for, 14 years. Hired our first employee, but the way it would work is as soon as I would get the blanks in, like I was having to make like, shipments every day, as many as they could stamp, just so I could have something to ship to customers. So they would send me these spoon blanks, and it looked like we were dealing drugs because they'd come wrapped up in paper. And then poor UPS guys bringing us these tiny packages that weigh 60 pounds full of these metal spoons. I'd get the blanks in, and then, gummit, I'd run out of hooks. And then I'd have to wait another 2 weeks to get hooks. And then as soon as I got hooks, me and this other girl, Norma, we would sit in there and we would pump out 2,000 spoons in a day. Because all we were doing is we had this big line. My father-in-law was sitting there with the packager. My mom was sitting there with split ring pliers. I'd sit there with the hook. Norma would sit there with the blanks, and we just piped them through. But it was miserable. I mean, it really was. But, man, it was a really cool experience. Because then it kind of like, we got to see it take off in Japan, which is a pretty unique experience. So like, getting sent like magazines that are in Japanese with our products like all over the cover and stuff, like, man, what a cool experience that was. And, just, so it all went so well. And me and Ben just kind of got to be better buddies. I think if you asked either one of us what our experiences were with each other, we don't have any business relationship anymore. Man, it was really fun. And we worked really, really well together. Over the years, he's really morphed more into a duck guide, actually. And so he's just not really in fishing much anymore. But talked to him just a couple weeks ago. Man, it was just a really fun thing to be a part of. But, then as a brand, it was kind of like all of a sudden, Nichols had been around for a really long time, but it wasn't relevant anymore. Had a lot of really great products, but nobody knew about them. And that big spoon kind of got the eyeballs back on the brand. And unlike maybe some other like flash in a pan brands, we had like all these really high quality legacy products to go along with it. And so it just, kind of was our foot in the door to new generations of guys that, had never heard of a Nichols pulsator spinnerbait. That all of a sudden, you guys sell spinnerbaits too? And they're really good? Awesome. And so, that was just kind of how it all worked out. And I'd say since then, spoons are like very up and down. We still have years that are just like crazy. We've run through like the striper market can go through some years where they love them. I think one reason I still have such fond memories of it is that it was just like, it was a really simple product idea. Like, not to knock any competitors, but there were no flashing lights or buzzing sounds. There was no gimmick. It's like, this is just a really big piece of flashing metal that fish want to eat. Like, that's it. It was just in your face. Like, that's what this product is. And I think that's one reason it was so fun to work on. We didn't feel like we were taking advantage of anybody. It was like, dude, I don't know why this thing just freaking works. But no, man, it was really fun.
I keep one.
That's a cool story.
I keep one hanging in the garage just because when people come over here, they see that and they're like, "You catch muskie on that?" Because they see all the teeth marks, and I'm like, "No, that's one day on Chickamauga."
Yeah,
that's all from largemouth.
Well, dude, I still remember like the first time I went up there to see Ben when we had some actual spoons in stock. I never caught I sold way more spoons before I ever caught a fish on one.
Yeah,
because my life was hell for a while. I mean, we got our first shipment in, and the next week it blew up. It was literally just the stars aligning. It was pure dumb luck. And so like I had never even caught a fish on them, and people are asking me like all these questions about how you use it, and I'm like, oh, I don't really know. But I remember too, like in the early days, Ben would post these pictures. He liked to either float a treble hook or like, one thing we learned from the Japanese market was these things called stinger hooks, like these floating J hooks. And so Ben starts throwing those on the front, and before I know it, he's throwing like pictures of doubles up. Like, dude, you come on, Ben, like you're staging that photo. Like, I know you are. So first time I ever went up there fishing with him with the spoon, we went to Pickwick. That was actually my second and third Magnum spoonfish were on the same cast. I had a 7-pounder on one end and about a 2-pounder on the other. And I was like, I can't believe like that actually happens. Because I'm just the guy like Kurt knows. Like, I'm not that good of a fisherman, man. I'm just the guy that's really good at making them. And so it was a really cool thing to like get to figure out for yourself too, and just like, I don't know, man, what a wild time that was. And honestly, I learned so much about the industry in that time. Like when you start having supply chain troubles because you're like overwhelming the system a little bit, it forces you to like, I learned so much more about manufacturing fishing products in that 6-month stretch than I would have in 10 years without it, because it got to be like, hey, if the supplier tells us they don't have the right brass, like I'm not the kind of guy that's going to sit around and wait on it. I'm going to start calling brass mills. And before I know it, like I'm negotiating prices on a coil of brass. Like, that's not something I would have known how to do. So it was such a good learning experience too, that forced me to learn and take ownership over like every stage of how stuff was made.
I think you hit that in absolute perfect timing, because that was probably one of the right at the height of the swim bait boom, when people were getting used to throwing big lures. So it wasn't out of the question, it just fit right into that same idea.
It was literally, like I said, dude,
There's no hesitation.
Yeah, when I think the 10XD, golly, I don't remember if the 10XD it was right around the same time. I can't remember if it was before or after. But yeah, I remember like the thing was like, man, even a 6XD seemed pretty big at the time. But then you hold this giant spoon up, or you look at it next to a gizzard shad, and yeah, it's like, dude, that seems like a big crankbait, but these shad are much bigger than that. And so yeah, it's just funny how it for a while, I feel like for like 3 or 4 years, everything was just bigger. There were Magnum Cincos. There were, it was just so funny how like for a while that was the trend, was just make stuff really big. And we've definitely gone the opposite way now. It just shows you how trendy everything is.
Now we're putting tentacles on everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's like
you could put some tentacles on a spoon.
I mean, hey, you never know. You never know.
I do think there was a 5-6 year period though that it seemed like no matter where you went, the bait was big.
Yeah.
Like even up here, I mean, I was catching fish on 7-inch Senkos on the river.
Yeah, I believe that. And part of I think the big storyline here is just like so much of it lived and died with like a Kentucky lake. I mean, the TVA is just like such an important fishery. And yeah, I mean, around 2017, 2018, like fishing kind of started to suck out there. And, with it went some of that big bait stuff. I mean, just those old school ledge fests where they were just like slugging it out, weren't a thing much anymore. Carp became a problem, pressure became a problem. There's all kind of things. It was inevitable that, just like the dice baits, like stuff is going to move on.
The bubble's going to burst.
Yeah, of course. But it's still like, I mean, it's always in our top 10, top 5 products. Like it's still something that we sell day in, day out is Magnum spoons. And it's like one of those things like, Ben is just such a good friend. And like, I'm also really thankful how good he was to work with. It's not every day, I think, that in this industry you can get involved with somebody, even from what seems like a simple, royalty deal, that before you know it, man, goes really poorly and people end up in court and people end up with hurt feelings and nobody wins. And I think me and Ben from the very beginning were just kind of like, man, this is fun. Like, let's have fun doing this. And like, I'm really like, one of the things I'm probably most proud of, like I said, is just that like that relationship has always been strong. We try not to burn any bridges, and I'm really thankful that we had such good folks to work with back then and still do. But yeah, it could have gone a lot of different ways.
That's something that happens in the fishing industry once every 5 to 10 years, right? Like it doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah.
Not many people get to be the force behind it and experience what that's like.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it was at times miserable. It was real scary. I mean, I remember all of a sudden, even just as a business owner, like I was used to working with like orders of magnitude less money. And then when you start talking about like, I'm about to order 20,000 of these spoons that cost me how much each? Like that was more than my yearly revenue last year. Yeah. And so, that started getting pretty scary and real in a hurry. So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't all like the big public impression was that I was just like sitting on a pile of money.
You're just sitting there printing it. You're just turning the crank and the money falls.
And like people just didn't realize how stressful that stuff can really be, especially when you're trying to make it. Like, I think that's what's hard. They didn't realize that I wasn't some big brand with a warehouse full of them already. Like we're just seeing if it worked, man. Like I didn't know.
Yeah. That when your supplier has to figure out how to manufacture it after the first 500.
Well, yeah. What was funny is I remember getting a call from our metal plater, like the people that apply the nickel plating to them. And they're like, hey man, like, we can only plate like 50 a day. And I remember like I quickly was like, well, Craig, that means like let's do the math here. Like that ain't gonna work. Like that means we're gonna be into like month 18 before we get this first order of them. And I got people calling. I still one of the funnier stories real quick is to show you how out of hand it got. I remember my buyer at Tackle Warehouse called me and he was like, "Hey man, like, I've got some on order." And again, like they had ordered 6 before any of this happened. He quickly sent me an order for like 30. Probably that Tuesday after the Sunday tournament ended, he calls me and he's like, "Hey, like, how many you got coming?" I was like, "Oh man, I got plenty coming. I think we got like, I don't know. At that point, we maybe had like 6,000 coming. I think we got like 6,000 on order, man. Like, they're telling me I'm going to get them in 3-4 weeks. Like, it's going to be fine." Well, I didn't realize the reason he asked me how many I had on order was he could turn around and send me an order for all of them, all of the ones that I had on order. And I was just like, that's not really what I meant. But it was just, that level of ridiculousness that, was hard to navigate for a while. And I mean, I was 22, so it ain't like I knew anything about anything.
Wow.
It was just dumb luck, man. Right place at the right time.
That's early in life to be thrown into something like that.
Yeah, it was fun though. It really was. Like as bad as it was sometimes, and as many sleepless nights as there were, like waiting on hooks and waiting on blanks to come in, so people would get off my back.
Yeah,
it was really good.